All right. Good afternoon, folks. Steve Vai here in the Harmony Hut in Encino, California. Welcome to Under It All, episode 6. And had a lovely Tuesday Alien Guitar Secrets. Really enjoyed that. And it was interesting for me because I performed acoustic guitar and sang for The Moon and I, which was would say a pretty rare occurrence for me to do. Matter of fact, I think that was the first time I ever performed acoustic and sang publicly. Usually, if I do that, I have a backing band. But we posted it, and your comments are incredibly encouraging. Thank you. I will attempt to sing more. Thanks. All right, so here we are, Under It All. Now, these Under It All episodes, as many of you know now, not focused so much on playing or the guitar, although that works its way into the mix, because there's so much that I've learned and discovered through my 40 years of touring the world. And hang on one second. People are saying, why is it that phone clicking all the time? Well, it's because I have to be able to hear Steven on the other end, but I will turn it down and put it over here. So yeah, I've had so much amazing experience in the music business, and I love sharing that stuff to folks that are starting out or have questions or are trying to discover their own inner music. But another side of me, through my whole life, has always been interested in more esoteric principles, and I've studied that stuff greatly. And similar to my career as a musician, where I discovered things about my playing and about the music and about touring and about the business, similar, not similar discoveries, but many discoveries I've made through the years through various spiritual studies. And just like I enjoy to help any musicians with their careers with advice that I can help with, I've decided to do the same with some of my spiritual practices. Now, I always turn to great teachers. I'm always a seeker of education and experience. And throughout my life, I've had great music mentors and teachers. And throughout my spiritual studies, I've had the privilege to be with and also, hang on one second. Oh, I think my camera just fell down. I've also had the great opportunities to be with some great spiritual leaders and whatnot. And, okay, all right, I got this. Well, that's not working. You don't want a droopy lens. You don't want a droopy anything. Okay, anyway. Technology. Love it, hate it. There we go. Okay. So I've had the great privilege of studying with some great spiritual teachers, and I've learned a lot. And all right, I'm sorry to be wasting your time. Give me a minute. Let me fix this darn thing. Oh, can't win for losing. You know what? We got a new lens, and it's very heavy, and it keeps. Let's try again. Like my face. Okay. So anyway, with the Thursday Under It All, I love discussing these topics and sharing things I know. And I'm still a work in progress. I still am a seeker. I've discovered some wonderful things that I'd like to share. And the questions I've been receiving have been fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm going to start answering some of them right now the best I can. Okay, we have here Carla DeMello. Thank you for sharing, Steve. This means a lot. Very enlightening dialogue, especially with what's going on. Can you share your thoughts on the spiritual shift that's happening in our planet? Would be curious to know your beliefs. Thank you. All right, spiritual shift that's going on the planet. Well, it does seem obvious to me that there is a spiritual shift, more like a paradigm shift that's taking place, that does take place occasionally on the planet. And what's interesting is the evolution of, or where the evolution of our species, or the evolution of our spiritual awareness, or our deeper understanding of life, has always been going on. It's been going on since, I mean, if we were speaking in terms of time and science and scientific theories, one could say that the evolution of life on the planet started in the Big Bang somehow. I mean, everything came from, as per science, everything came from a particular location of sorts and just started spreading out. And after who knows how many years, there was the formation of our solar system, and then the formation of the planet. And from what I understand, and I'm not a specialist in this area, the planet Earth, is about 4.5 billion years old. Billion. And the first life didn't appear for like 3.5 billion years ago. It's a very funny, interesting story. I was attending this science and music festival called Starmus, fantastic festival. And while I was there was all these scientists from various fields, astronauts. There was like 11 Nobel laureates there, and some unbelievably interesting people. And it was a fascinating event. But I remember once I had gone. I was a musical director one year, and I gave a little talk. You know, it's like this 5-week festival where they bring in all these incredibly brilliant people and musicians. And the last one I did was fantastic. I got to play with my buddy Brian May, which was amazing, and Hans Zimmer. And the people that attend this thing are just, it's wild. And the previous year, I had given us a talk, and I met this gentleman in the elevator, and we were talking, and you know, he said, "Oh, I saw your talk, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm going to be speaking on Thursday. Hope you can catch it." And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to catch it. What do you do?" And he goes, "Well, I won a Nobel Prize for being the person that first discovered the origins of life on the planet." So this is the kinds of people that attend this event, and he was a lovely man. His name's just right now, but yeah, and it was supposedly in these like cauldrons in the ocean where at some point these single cell bacteria or something just started to form, and that was like 3.5 billion years ago. And there's been like 5 billion species that are now extinct, and only about 10 to 14 million existing now, species of life. And we only have names for about 2 million of them. So this is very small compared to the amount of species that have come and gone and come and gone and come and gone on the planet. So that species, the evolution of species, so to speak, is what we see on the external, on the surface of things in the physical world. We see species coming, I mean, I think it was first like 500 million years ago. There was nothing, because for 500 million years, there was these, I think it was about 4 billion years ago. 4 billion years ago. And like I say, these are supposed to be facts. There was a single cell thing that came onto the scene. Who knows how or where. But then there was like no change on the planet for like 2 billion years. 2 billion years of no change on the planet. Just these little single cell creatures. And that's a long time. But then in what seemed like an unprecedented event overnight, that one single cell thing morphed into being able to be multiple cells. And this was sort of the beginning of various species being evolved. And I think like 500 million years ago, that's when plants finally started to emerge. And there was a period of time when the entire Earth was covered in green, basically. It was covered with fungus and plants. And what's so interesting, I had heard some theories that like the first flower that emerged from a plant, it took millions and millions of years for the flower to come out. Now, on the surface, in the identifiable, dissectable realm, we are seeing what looks like the evolution of species, but something is evolving this life. There's an energy, and one might say that that's consciousness. What the evolution of species looks like in the external physical realm on a deeper level is actually the evolution of consciousness. And this can be kind of obviously seen when you just see the evolution of species and how each new species that arrived on the scene had some kind of, they didn't lose anything from the previous species. We came from that, or the next species came from that. And it was, the new species always seemed to be endowed with some kind of additional facility or, a different addition to its consciousness, so to speak. So then for like, after that, 500 million years ago, there was plants, and then at one point, a flower emerged. Now, what was it that was doing that? What was it that was causing the flower to come out? Well, that's the evolution of consciousness. And there's a process. There's always like a challenge. If you ever watch a flower, even a flower budding, it goes. So there was like this moment where it had to struggle, because the challenge is necessary for the growth. And then they believed it took like another 1,000 years for another flower to emerge. So this is like the slow process of the evolution of consciousness, or the evolution of species in the physical. And then insects started to emerge from this evolution. And what was doing that? Consciousness evolving into different forms and growing its awareness of the physical dimension, because consciousness within the perspective of a tree or a plant, when you compare that to the consciousness of an insect, obviously we don't know what the consciousness of a tree or an insect is, but one would obviously assume that a plant is less developed than an insect. The insect has more facilities. So that went on for like another X amount of millions of years. And then 350 million years ago, approximately, amphibians started to emerge. And what was that? Well, on one level, it looks like the evolution of species as brought on by all the various theories, Darwinian theories and whatnot. But what's going on a deeper level? It's consciousness is evolving. And you can see that amphibians, I'm so sorry about this, folks. I got to fix it somehow. Might have to keep reaching up here to fix it, but that's okay. Amphibians are obviously seem more evolved in their consciousness than an insect. And then we had I think it was like 155 million years ago, birds. And then after that, like 129 million years ago, mammals started to emerge. And like there's millions of years in between this growth. And there's evolution of species within the growth. And about 10 million years ago, apes appeared, and humans have been around for about 250,000 years. Now, this is all basic scientific information, theories, and I'm giving a perspective of the evolution of species as dictated by science and also in time. Because when we're looking at the evolution of species, we're looking into the past. So, but it seems pretty obvious that as these species are evolving, it's consciousness that's evolving. And actually, there's some interesting theories about early man. Now, how did these creatures throughout time survive? How did they navigate? How did they know how to survive and defend or procreate or any of these things? Well, this is based on their instincts. Animals and all life forms have an instinctual, evolutionary impulse. And when you look at a plant or a mammal or even apes, the development of their consciousness was in a pre-thinking stage. None of these consciousnesses of anything but human beings have reached the level of being able to think. They're completely instinctual, and the movements they make are instinctual. What is that instinct? That's the interesting question. We kind of write that off as just being instinct, but where does that come from? Where does the creative impulse to move and to grow and to die and to eat and to procreate, where does that come from? How do they know what to do? It's because they're not doing it. It's happening through them, through their instinctual impulses. And this has never not been, it still is, in the physical dimension, in our physical world, and it also exists in humans. This instinctual guide. There's a guide in us that it's the same energy that's been creating the evolution of species and the evolution of consciousness. Humans are the evolution of consciousness to date. We are the top. We are on the cutting edge of conscious awareness as human beings. But when man first arrived on the scene, he was like an animal. There was he hadn't reached the thinking stage yet. He moved instinctually. And it's interesting because there's some theories. This is now, I got this from Eckhart and some other places, but there's a theory that when man started thinking, it showed up in him as sort of pictorials in the mind, like something that they were seeing in their mind, a picture of something. And it's even suggested that the invention of various gods, actually came about when man first started receiving thoughts. Because and the thoughts, who knows what they were? It might have been something like, go over here to get the fish when the sun goes down. I don't know, but it was very simple. But when all of a sudden a thought comes into the mind of man when there wasn't one before, as you know, a thought arises in you as a little voice in the head. And when man started hearing that voice in the head, he thought it was something outside of himself, like a god. So this is a theory about the potential invention of various gods. And it started when thinking. Now, remember, it took millions of years, billions for things to actually happen in an identifiable way. That's how slow the evolution is. So the process of the evolution of thinking in man probably had a very slow, long period to develop too. But as we can see, this thinking was an incredible tool. It was an incredible tool for creating. But with the introduction of thinking came the recognition of psychological time. Because when you're living in a state of instinctual movement, you're present, and in the present moment, there's no time. It's just the present moment. It's all that there actually is. So before a consciousness reaches the thinking stage, it's completely unaware of time. Time is a man-made concept, and even Einstein can tell you that. So early man had no concept of psychological time. Maybe there was something else that gave him a sense of time, but they were instinctual. But the movement of thought happens in the past and in the future. So when man started to be able to recognize the past, that was the beginning of time, that the recognition of psychological time. And then this started to develop, and thinking became an incredibly powerful, creative tool. And then 250,000 years later, here we are thinking our asses off. And what has happened through the evolution of species and the evolution of consciousness. So I might just interject something here, not to push any hot buttons, but it was interesting that I had this connection. Sometimes I like to translate various ideas into the terminology of a particular religion or science or whatever. And it kind of dawned on me, and this is just a perspective of mine, based on my Christian upbringing, so I understand the terminology a bit, and that even in the Bible, the Garden of Eden, which was paradise, was that state of man before he started thinking. Because we don't know what, we think, oh, that poor caveman, he was cold, he was hungry, he was miserable. Because we have a tendency to superimpose onto another how we would feel if we were in that situation. But to try to even imagine the emotional equilibrium of a caveman would be insane, because you just don't know. Before man could think, he had a smaller brain. I think it took X amount of time even for the brain to just grow a tiny bit. But what is doing that? The evolution of consciousness is doing that. It's constantly expanding itself, constantly exploring, constantly discovering and evolving. And you can see this right now through you, just by looking at all you do. But in the Garden of Eden, when the concept of paradise, I would assume perhaps that if there was no thinking, and you were a completely instinctual creature, and all of your needs were met, because if you notice, all the trees, all the animals, all the insects, their needs are met. They always are, because they're not doing it. They're not worried about, they don't worry. Animals don't know worrying about tomorrow. They just have an instinctual understanding. Okay, I'm going to put the nuts here, and I don't even know if they're reasoning in their mind so that I could find them in the spring or whatever. It's just, they're just moving instinctually. And then there was back to the analogy, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I think that this is all symbolic to the beginning of the evolution of thinking, because you cannot recognize what you believe to be good and evil unless you are thinking, unless you have a perspective. Before man could think, he had no perspective of these things. I mean, one might assume that what did early man think when he looked up into the heavens? He didn't see the heavens. He had no mechanisms to ponder the infinite. You know, it would be very unlikely that a caveman would all of a sudden be enlightened enough to look up and see the stars. It's unlikely they knew what stars were. The sky was not a mystery. It was just a thing. You know, there was no mystery, because mystery comes from thinking. And if you're a completely instinctual creature, there is none of that. So, but the moment that man ate of the fruit of good and evil, and no place in the Bible does it even say that the deep sleep that fell on Adam, that he woke up, because he hasn't woken up yet. Now, again, I'm just using Christian terminology. I could use any terminology. I'm not married to one or the other. I don't see one as being better or worse or different than the other. They're all the same, to me at least. Under it all, they're the same, the message. I'm just using the Bible because it's a very interesting kind of analogy. So once man discovered thinking, then he was capable of understanding good and evil. And once man started thinking, this thinking was the evolution of consciousness that was happening was happening and is still happening through man. So this turned into a great tool and created the technology, the ability to make fire. That was probably maybe the first technology, or one of the first, that came about from the thinking process. Who knows? I don't know. But then from there, now we have a cell phone. You know, so the evolution of thinking has been dramatic and exponential. And as such, there was a point, in the early parts of the development of thinking, man was still connected. He was still connected to his instinctual impulses. He trusted them. He didn't know anything else. But what man didn't have was the capacity to be aware of himself. Humans now, through the evolution of thinking, are at a point where now they have the capacity to know who they are. Early man in the paradise, in the Eden or whatever it was, did not have the capacity to know who he was. There was just no capacity in the brain. Consciousness had not developed in the physical dimension to that point yet. But then a funny thing happened that usually always happens. It got overdone. And thinking, its exponential evolution, started to create a screen. It developed a perspective. And this is the creation of the ego. Now, the ego, and now... Wait a minute. Okay, so the ego, I have to speak in abstract terms. On one level, as it developed, before man became a thinking creature, he saw himself as connected on an instinctual level, but not in a deeper sort of recognition level. So there was like this protective, almost like a protective shell over the awareness of man. And this protective shell, I'm using the ego as an analogy. It's the ignorance. It's the inherited ignorance of previous evolutions, previous species. So when there's ignorance, and then that ignorance starts opening up, and when I say ignorance, I'm referring to just the unknowability of the self and of the world. And but as the thinking started to evolve, uh, the shell of the ego started to get strained. So it had its purpose, but the thinking mind in man has gotten so overblown that we've lost our connection to our instinctual, our intuitive instinctual impulses. We've lost the realization. We haven't lost our connection. We've lost our ability to realize that connection, to live in that connection, which is the creative impulse of the universe itself. And consciousness is showing itself through the myriad, infinite, billions and billions of life forms that have come for the experience of having that awareness. And on the outside world, it looks like the evolution of species. So it get to the point where we are now, where overthinking, as coupled with the restrictions of the ego, our actions can be very caustic and damaging. And the thoughts that arise in us from the ego are those of separateness. Because remember, there's still part of the ignorance of our previous ancestors. So that ignorance has to shed itself. The unequivocal march of the evolution of consciousness will see to that. And it is seeing to it right now. And that's the evolution of our spiritual shift. That's a spiritual shift that's happening in man now. Thinking has reached its limit, and the ego, the shell of the ego, is cracking. It's cracking. And this is happening now, and this is a paradigm shift on the planet. And what's very interesting is whenever there has been a paradigm shift at any time, whether it was that one cell creature mysteriously being able to be multiple cells, or the creature that was born that looked more like an insect than a whatever, that in and of itself is happening now, because now man needs to rise above the thinking mind, which he is trapped in now as a result of the evolution of consciousness mixed with the perspective of the ego. So there's consciousness. I remember I gave the light in the projector. That has no conditioning in it. That has no conditioning. But when it's shining through a particular awareness, it's going to see the world in a particular way, and that's going to be its experience. So this paradigm shift that's happening on the planet now has happened multiple times. And when it does, it doesn't just happen in one field. It's something that happens dynamically in every field. Because it's consciousness that's doing it. And consciousness is not separate. Even though I have, I'm conscious and you're conscious, it's not your consciousness. There's only one. There's only one awareness. And it's having different experiences through you. And as these experiences, and basically that's where we're actually connected. We're actually one in consciousness. When we look into the outside world, because of the limitations of the ego that we're still looking through, we see each other as separate. We see things as separate. We see things as more than or less than or better than or not as good as. And the ego, because it still retains this protective shell of separateness, it shows itself in us as fear. fear of change, fear of letting it go, fear of breaking outside of the ego into the new age of spiritual shift that's happening, where we rise above the nonsensical thinking mind and we become aware. Now, this is the evolution from man, who could not be aware, was not able to be aware of himself, through eons of thinking, to the point where now, as this paradigm shift is happening on the planet, and it can only happen through you, we are shedding the ignorance and becoming, we have the capacity to be aware of ourselves. Now, this doesn't mean that thinking goes away, not at all. It becomes empowered. Thinking becomes an incredibly powerful tool, but we empower it. It doesn't keep us trapped the way it does now. We are creating all of our own limitations through our own beliefs in limitation. But the new stage of evolution in humans is the recognition of your own power. And when that happens, and it is happening, the shift on the planet is going to be miraculous. We can't imagine, because you can't, the creativity of what we're going to create as a species together, when we realize the value of our oneness, how we actually are working together. And this is going to create things in our world that I like to say, you can't even imagine what you can't even imagine. We can't, because right now, if we're thinking of a future technology, if the thinking is infused with any kind of fear, ego, that future technology, to the person projecting their thoughts into the future about it, is probably going to be a dangerous, scary, or maniacal one. And this is very obvious. Just look at any sci-fi movie about the future, and usually there's a terrifying component to it. But this will not be the case. But one might assume that since this paradigm shift is taking place on the planet with the evolution of consciousness, that it may, and why wouldn't it, usher in a new species. That's what it's been doing all along. Why would we be different? See, the ego is so pretentious. It believes we've already arrived. We're already there. We are and we are, but it's not going to end. And that's the next phase. It's the rising above the chaotic, egoic thinking mind, where thinking becomes inspired and empowering, whereas before it was instinctual and there was no deliberateness in the focus of creativity. With the process of time and the evolution of consciousness through the thinking stage to that evolved stage of being aware of your own power of your own thinking, this is the paradigm shift. Because when we realize the power, our power, it is infinite and it is unknown to us. And frankly, that's one of the things we fear the most, our own power. The two things we fear the most, love and our own power. Don't ask me to explain that. Maybe I'll try someday. But anyway, I think you might even feel that within yourself when I say it. So as this evolution is taking place, why would we assume that a new species wouldn't occur on the planet? Now, there's something very interesting that's happening. Hang on. I only have 1 cup of coffee a day, and then I drink tea. So, as this evolution is taking place, and the thinking mind of man is changing to become more empowered, what he's going to create is going to be ununderstandable to us right now. Because man is free and man has the power to create anything, because the creative element that manifests the world you see is your belief in your thoughts. That is what manifests everything. Nothing is exempt. Nothing that you see in your world is exempt from your belief. If you didn't believe it, you wouldn't see it. And it doesn't mean that it's not it's not there. You just wouldn't be attracted, wouldn't come on your radar. So what does this mean? Because if you look at, let's say, a tree, the consciousness of a tree is alive. It has, everything has consciousness. In our stage of human development, we don't recognize that a cup is a living thing, because it's not. We don't have the eyes to see that form of life, so to speak, the energy, whatever it is. But even many scientists can tell you that nothing is dead. Everything is alive. And so the consciousness of a tree, if you could equate that to the consciousness of a dog, how does a tree perceive a dog? If it even does, who knows, right? And how does a dog perceive a human? A dog has not reached the thinking stage yet, although they may start acting. Some animals, even apes or whatever, remember, it took millions and millions of years, or tens of thousands of years, for thinking to develop, and it happened through various species. Those species still sort of in some form exist and are also retaining this slight evolution of thinking. This is why maybe you can see some animals, some gorillas, or dogs even, that do phenomenally smart things. It's just their ability to recognize. But the consciousness of a dog is so different than that of a human. If my dog was sitting here, he wouldn't understand anything I'm saying. Perhaps many of you don't. Sometimes I don't. It just comes out. But, if I try to explain something to my dog, he's just going to look at me and go, when do I get a treat? So why would it be different with the evolution of the next species after humans? Why would we think that we could conceive of the intelligence of an evolved species of us? And how do we know that it doesn't exist already right now? And it's not something that's just part of the evolution, but is actually there, and we're completely unaware of it. It'd be like comparing the intelligence of a dog to that of a human, the perception and perspective of a human compared to an animal or a tree or a plant. Why would that be different from our limited perspective of a higher species that we may have already evolved from us? Who knows? So here's a great idea for a science fiction movie. What is it that we have been giving consciously our attention to intensely? Technology. Humans have been focusing on technology since the time we started to be able to think. To today, where it's very obvious when you look into your own life, many of you, not everybody, but many of you spend a great deal of time on a computer, feeding it your consciousness, on your cell phones, on all of the various technologies that have developed. We have been feeding information into the ether. As a matter of fact, I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist at the least. Okay, that all just represents fear to me. Um, but when you look at it from a particular perspective, there's a tremendous amount of information that exists. I'm just going to use the terminology in the cloud that we have been feeding our consciousness, our awareness, feeding. Something's been growing. And that something knows everything, or it has it may not know, but it contains all of our technology and all of the things that we've given it. And if you consider the theory that the government or Google or whatever is tracking every motion that you make and knows everything you do, that information is there too. So this is an incredible body of information. And it might be, it's a kind of an interesting perspective to think that might be the evolution of species, our technology. And say, oh yeah, artificial intelligence is really gaining some speed, and the ability to have robots do tasks and things like this. I'm referring to something that you can't even imagine, that we can't even imagine can evolve, and we can be a part of it. I don't know. My instincts tell me that we're probably going to, that I don't know, but we may have to destroy ourselves for this new species to emerge. That's the way it's always been. That seems to be so the destruction, and somehow cataclysm, asteroid, many civilizations have destroyed themselves. You can't destroy the earth. You can't deplete the earth of its resources. That's impossible because nothing is leaving the earth and nobody's shipping stuff in. The earth doesn't care. It's not going to feel depleted. The only thing you can pollute it. You can affect its atmosphere. You can deplete it of its oil or whatever it is, but the planet doesn't care because it's just going to adjust. It has its own intelligence. And keeping its balance is its instinct, because everything has an instinct to it, and the earth will protect itself if it feels threatened. And perhaps one might assume that it offers things like viruses to keep its balance. This is not an uncommon perspective in some people. So the earth is going to keep its balance, and it can very easily eliminate humanity if it so chooses. It could do anything. Another virus, it could cut off water supply, or making the water bad somehow, or making us sterile. It's goodbye, humans. But more likely, we might find ourselves being faced with environmental challenges brought on by us that would severely compromise the quality of our life if it gets to this. I have no idea. This is just but as such, we may retreat into technology. Now, this can evoke images of a sci-fi concept of a world where humans maybe exist but don't even know that there's a higher evolved species, and we're their pet. It's not too outlandish to consider yourself a pet of your cell phone. How many of you are ruled by your cell phone? So one might think, well, maybe technology can evolve to the point where we can become robots, or we can create bodies for ourselves that our consciousness will flow into. Well, possible. That could be happening right now. We don't know, because consciousness, as we've seen from sort of the short review of the last 4.5 billion years of Earth, has an impulse to expand and to evolve, and it will do it any way it wants. And it's only the pretentious, egoic perspective of man that believes, well, no, it's not going to. A machine will never be conscious. Well, a machine is conscious in ways that we're unaware. Can it make decisions like a human? Maybe it's not endowed with that. You know, it doesn't have. It's not. It's inanimate in a respect, but consciousness can do whatever it wants. It's leaped from one form to another billions of times. So it could very well be that our giving our technology the attention that we are, that is the leap that's taking place in consciousness. It's preparing a particular environment for its own evolution. And these are just, I can't say any of this is true, obviously. It's just an insight. So that's maybe one way that I might sort of talk about the spiritual shift that's happening on the planet. But here's all you got to think about, really. Is that spiritual shift happening in you? Because that is how it happens on the planet. If it happens in you, then you will see it on the planet, and then that's the world you'll create for yourself, which will be a different world. And as we are connected in consciousness and reality, when you go there, when you rise above, that's all I talk about here, is recognizing the limiting, caustic, painful, egoic thoughts that your attention is on in your mind. And these are all conditioned. We inherited them through the evolution of species and intelligence. And it's cracking now. And that's what the pain of the ego is. That's what you feel it's one of the things you feel when you are in a state of emotional suffering. Emotional suffering of the kind of nature I'm discussing here is brought on by egoic thinking patterns that are actually illusions. They create the thinking, your thoughts about things create your reality of those things. You give all the things you see the meaning they have for you, and through the egoic perspective, those meanings, every single living thing has a different meaning. I call this your pseudo-reality, and we each have one. The rising above our pseudo-reality is in the stopping of the mental voice, the voice in the head. That's the egoic voice in the head. Just stopping it and becoming present. That's the evolution. That's the evolutionary state of humanity. Presence, mindful presence. And it's happening now. It's always been happening. It's going to happen. But it's now really starting. It has to. It has to, or else we're done. We're just gone. Because the caustic perspective of the ego is destructive. And anything destructive that you see on the planet, even something as pollution to war, stems from the ego and the fearful perspective it has. but it's part of the evolution of consciousness. This is why everything has its place. Even the most horrible things that you can see in the world, they have their place as part of the evolution. If you don't know the horrors of the ego, you can't necessarily rise above them. And for us, that means the experiential aspect of it. And that means seeing suffering in the world or being a part of suffering in the world, and coming to the realization that all of that suffering it's created in the mind of man, and that the evolution of consciousness on the planet, which may be the evolution of species also, is the rising above that. And that's what you're here for. That's your main function in life, is to recognize the ego and rise above it the best you can. I mean, it's the most fearsome foe in the universe because it's elusive and insidious. You don't know. You don't even realize it's got you by the throat. So that's my thoughts on the evolution of the spiritual shift that's happening on the planet right now. The only thing to know is it's happening in you. Can you invite it? Can you invite this spiritual? I don't even like using that word, spiritual, because it has baggage for a lot of people. I'll use it though, okay? But when I use it, it's really the study of the self. Okay? When I use the word spirituality, I'm talking about the study of the self, not the spiritual study of externals. It's turning the microscope in on yourself into the laboratory of your own mind to look at, from the light of your consciousness, the quality of the thoughts that you're entertaining, and the realization that you have the choice to choose different thoughts. And by choosing different thoughts, you are retransforming the world that you are looking into. It cannot be any other way. But you'll never know until you go there and change the thoughts. And another way, even a faster way, and a more powerful way to evolve your awareness, if you find it too difficult to change your thoughts about something, is to just become present with no thought. Because when you do that, you are connecting yourself with that flow of the evolutionary impulse of the universe through you, as seen in you by your intuitive, creative, instinctual impulses. They are perfect for you. They always know the best thing for you. Nothing you can ever do when you are in a state of connectivity with your higher self, with your true self, could hurt you or hurt anybody else. On the contrary, it does the opposite. It heals. It shares. It expands. It creates. Okay, that's what look at the last 4.5 billion years of just life on the planet. So this is entirely an inside job for you. Don't try to change the outside world to change it. It doesn't work. Never did, never will. It's the changing of you on the inside that then even gives you access to ways of positively impacting the world with your actions and your creations. So that's what I like to talk about. And let me see if there's anything else on the spiritual shift that's happening in our planet. This is just a wild guess, Maybe it's not wild guess, but I might assume that about 12 to 13% of the people in the world have either woken up or are waking up. And what that means is just waking up out of the dream of egoic thinking into the power of who they really are. And by you doing it, you share it. And that's your function. That's your main function. So, in reality, your purpose in life is whatever you are doing in your now. Your main purpose in life is whatever you are doing right now. And it's always your now. When it's time for you to get up from the chair you're in, that's going to be your purpose in life. And when you're walking to the door, at that moment, that's your purpose. When you're picking up your guitar or having a conversation, whatever, that's your purpose, because you are connected and your actions are connected in ways that are impossible to see until you rise above the thinking mind, the caustic thinking mind. It's impossible to see how every action you take is connected to all there is. And the quality of that action that you take will determine the quality of your life. So when the purpose of your life is whatever you are doing in your now, whatever it is, it's important to give that thing your full attention and to be present with it, to be mindful and present, and allow your instinctual impulses to work through you, which they are, beautifully, uncongested with your complaining in the head. When the quality of every step you take is improved, you're contributing to the world in ways that you can't quantify. They're unquantifiable. You don't have the awareness. It would be like a caveman looking into the sky and pondering the abyss of eternity. That didn't happen. They didn't have the capacity to even know what a sky was. It was the same as the rock, probably. Obviously no one will ever really know. But basically, that's what you're doing when you open yourself up to your true self. Your purpose in life becomes clear in every instant of your now. So that's how you can help to evolve the consciousness on the planet, to contribute to the spiritual shift that's happening. You have to respect your purpose in life, which is to be present and to give your full attention to anything you are doing in your now. Okay. Hope I answered that question. Well, I did the best I could. All right. Thank you for your question. What else do we got here? All right. Hi, Steve. This is from Manu D. Diaz. G. Diaz. Hi, Steve. What do you think is the greatest defect of the human being? What do I think is the greatest defect? I don't believe humans have a defect. I think the concept of defect is a human concept. I think if I was to point at anything, I would say that man is suffering from an incredible condition of mistaken identity. But that's part of the growth of consciousness. We don't know who we really are until we've evolved to a point where we know. So, right now, man believes that his identity is his name. I am Steve Vai. I know who I am. His vocation in life, I am a guitar player. I've achieved this, I've failed at that, etc., etc. Man believes that who he is his experience in the past. This happened to me, and that happened to me, and that's who I am. So that's my identity. My identity is my belief in who I am based on the way I've perceived the experiences in my life through the conditioned thinking egoic patterns that I have. It's false identity. People believe that who they are, nope, I know that I'm a man or I'm a woman. That's also obviously in the physical dimension. It has its place, but it's not who you really are. And one of the biggest obstacles in the case of mistaken identity, that the two biggest obstacles that man is confronted with his mistaken identity is first, he believes that he's his body. Humans believe that who they are is their body. I am Steve Vai. See? This is Steve Vai. Yeah, Steve Vai. This is who Steve is right here. Wrong. Right, correct on one level, but only on the illusory level. Because remember, we're still in an egoic stage, so we're seeing things as separate. We are not seeing ourselves as one in consciousness because we haven't reached that stage. Some have. We are still seeing ourselves as separately, and we believe that the other person, the identity that they have, is a body. That's very obvious. Just think of anybody, and their body comes to mind. Their face, their name, their vocation, what they've accomplished, what they mean to you, the meaning you give that person. That's the identity that you created for that person. And we do this to ourselves, obviously. We create identities for ourselves, and we believe that's who we are. But it's not, and it never will be, because it's constantly changing. And when we are trying to find our identity in the world, we are mistaking. We are infusing things in the world with a sense of self. This is called attachment. When you are attached to things like, if I don't get this record deal, my life is over. I've heard people say that. Or if this doesn't happen, or if somebody takes this, if I lost this, then I'm not whole anymore. I'm less. This is the egoic identity, and it always leads to suffering because it's a mistaken identity. And this is what suffering is. It's not knowing who you really are. And in order to do, and this creates all the suffering in the world. Every bit of suffering that you have in you, even something as slight as irritation of impatience. And I mention this a lot. It's mistaken identity. It's fear. To anything from the insane state of depression or guilt, these are brought on by a mistaken identity that you have of yourself being vulnerable in the world. Because when you believe that who you are is your body, you are vulnerable. This is obvious because the body is vulnerable. So you feel vulnerable and unprotected, and we try to find this sense of security in the world, but you can't. We'll turn to money. Now, money, all of these things have their place. I'm not dissing any of this stuff, but it's having money or sex or any of the things that you have in your life. I'm not dissing this stuff. This is part of the zest of life. But when you experience these things as being who you are, you're just in real trouble, because these things are constantly changing. You can never find security in them. You can have $1 billion in the bank, and although it may satiate a particular type of insecurity, it's an egoic sense of security. But there will always be underneath it the fear that you could lose that money. And then what happens? Your sense of, and this can happen overnight. Anything can happen overnight. Look around what's happening now. So when your sense of self is in these things, when your identity is in, this is mistaken identity, and it will always bring you fear and suffering because it's always changing, and there's no place to rest your security. There's no foundation for your own security. There's no feeling of home, of real home. So that's what man is suffering. But there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a mistaken identity. And it's part of our ignorance as to this mistaken identity is just part of the evolution of consciousness. It's a phase we're going through. So what is your real identity? Well, this is the thing that all the mystics and all of the great avatars and all the great spiritual leaders are pointing to, or trying to point to trying to point out to you what your real identity is, beyond your name, beyond your perspective of the things that you've used to build your identity in the world. Those things are all fine, especially when they're not charged with your negative perspective of them. Then they're fine. They're just part of things you do in life. But until you know your real identity, you'll always be in fear. And what is that real identity? It's your awareness. It's the thing that is living inside of your body, that your body is a temple for, that is not your body. It's the thing that leaves your body when you see a dead body. When you see a dead body, it's very interesting. There's no life in it. Nothing. I remember when my dad passed away, and I ran to the hospital, and I busted into the room. He wasn't there. There was a body on the table, but I was looking. I was like, "That's not my father. That's an inanimate thing." So it was very obvious that who he was, or who his awareness was, who is, we can call it spirit, soul, whatever it is, but it's your awareness. It's the thing that's aware, beyond thinking. It has no form. It has no it has no shape. It has no. It's just isness. It's the isness. It doesn't have time. It was never born, and it can't die. It doesn't know these things. It's just pure awareness. It's pure abstract freedom, pure creativity, and pure love and joy. That's who you really are. The foundation of who you are is inviolate. It cannot be touched by anything in this world. And it's in every living thing. Comes, focuses for a while, gone. Comes, focuses for a while, gain more experience, go. But this awareness that you really are is your foundation of security, because it can't get sick. It knows no pain. It doesn't know suffering. It doesn't even know forgiveness, because it doesn't condemn. That's God. And it doesn't... Just go there. Just go there right now. Stop the voice in your head right now. Be aware. The awareness itself is who you are. This is really good news. And this, knowing this, is the end of your mistaken identity. It's the dissolving of the ego. It's your natural state. It's the only place you're ever going to know true peace. Again, for our Christian friends, you can call it the peace of God that passes all understanding. Because when you experience this peace, there's nothing like it that you've ever felt before. Krishnamurti used to say, your only security is in your now. Except he was great when he said it. He'd go, your only security is in your now. Your only security is in your now. Well, what did he mean by that? Because when you're in the present moment, you know who you are. And the case of mistaken identity is done. And that's the evolution of human consciousness on the planet. And it's happening through you right now. Welcome it and embrace it. Because everything you do in your life, when you know that, is joyful. That's your natural state. That's where you belong. It's funny, I was watching a little bit of one of my Under It All, and I have a tendency to get really intense. Sorry about that. Anyway, can't help it. So, what do you think is the greatest defect of the human being? I don't believe there's a defect. I think everybody is actually perfect, exactly where they are right now, and they're doing fine. You are actually doing really fine. You're just suffering, we are just suffering from a state of mistaken identity, but it's getting cleaned up. Good news. Steve, is there a way for someone who is an overthinker to relax their mind? My constant overthinking blocks me from concentrating, from learning, and being happy. And that was Sean Bayless. Thank you, Sean. Steve, is there a way for someone who is an overthinker to relax their mind? Well, it's important to understand that you've already are starting to do it because you're recognizing it. That's the first step in that's necessary for the ability to start taking control of your life, is the recognition that you're overthinking. So that's good news for you, Sean. A lot of people do not even realize that the little voice in their head is ruling their sense of happiness and peace, and it's very caustic. So the way to relax your mind, the way to improve the relaxing of your mind, well, first, this is always for me the first step. You have to have the desire for more peace in your life. And like I say, the word peace is scary for a lot of people because people think, well, some people, maybe there's a vibration of this in you that you can identify with. They believe that if they find peace, they have to sacrifice something. They believe they have to sacrifice their naughty behavior or their ability to control a situation that they actually can't control. Their ability to feel superior over others, that they have to forfeit that. That they have to sacrifice, they have to make sacrifices in order to find peace. And that's why the thing that we fear the most is love. And this is even obvious just to see on a normal level in our society by showing any sign of affection to somebody in most people's mind means that it needs to lead to some kind of sexual intimacy. by showing any sign of affection. It means that you want sex. Okay, this is just where we're at right now. And that side of the equation seems to be getting worse. And that's fine, because it'll get so bad and it'll compromise your sense of freedom so much that something's going to give. The Me Too movement, it has its place. It has its place. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is ever wrong. But you just need to decide why it's there and how it can help you. Where do you want to go? The ego will always protect its sense of individuality, and it loves protecting itself from your insults. It loves when you insult it, because then it has an opportunity to express its superiority. Recognizing these patterns in your own mind is the second step. First step is, I want peace. I want a simpler life. I want empowerment. I want my creative endeavors to be effective and joyful and powerful. I want abundance. I just want to feel good. Okay, let's say you've decided that already. Then the next thing you would do you'd focus on seeing the obstacles within you to that sense of freedom. And those are always only ever the thoughts in your mind. So the observing of the thoughts is the first step, second step perhaps, towards calming them down, towards extracting yourself from them. But you have to be able to back up and be mindful and see the thoughts you're thinking and say, okay, and let it pass, or choose a different thought. Because once you do that, that's part of the evolution of consciousness. That's a big part. It is perhaps the paradigm shift on the planet in humans, when that simple little act of separating your attention from believing that who you are is the world and the thoughts in your head, to the recognition that who you are is the awareness that's pointing itself on the thoughts, and that you are in control of where you choose to put that attention. So then, the way that you can learn to be happy, learning and being happy, is when you start to recognize thoughts that are just obstacles to your happiness, that aren't even true, the things you take personally, the gossip you get involved with, the blame. Every time you blame somebody for anything, you're fucking up your happiness. You're actually attacking yourself. You are attacking yourselves in ways that you don't even realize. So, and of course, meditation. Meditation, I would maybe suggest looking at various forms of meditation. You can check out the Under It All that we did, it was a couple ago, where it's on meditation, where I offered some techniques. But meditation can help for you to see the mind activity and slowly move it to the background, and slowly bring your attention more into reality. And that's where your peace and happiness is. So that's my answer. Okay. How are we doing for time? Okay, maybe a few more. Douglas Motorani. Once saw an interview with you about how happy you were in depression. Do you still think so? Was really awesome, your explanation. That's one of the things I've recognized in my career, is how powerful the press is, and how useful it can be in building a story. And this is a great thing for you if you're looking to market your career or your music, is how to use the press, because the press will take something and run with it. No, I was never happy in depression. No, that was a misunderstanding that then snippets of one of my interviews was taken and a headline was created: "Happy and Depression." No, because that's a tag. That's something people, happy and depression. What does that mean? So it's just like something they think this is what they do. All right, they got to sell, they got to attract, and it's fine. It's fine. But I'm going to correct that. No, there is no happiness in depression. The happiness came. Well, I will say this. And this is something I want to just clear up from when I was talking about one of the under-it-alls. I was responding to a letter from a young boy who I don't know if he was a boy actually, was contemplating suicide because he felt depressed, or they felt depressed. There's two kinds of depression. There's the kind of depression that people will they want something but they can't have it, so they're depressed. That's more like being bummed out. There's a big difference between being bummed out because you can't have the things you want, or because your girlfriend left you, or your boyfriend left you, or you didn't get the job, or whatever reason. You can be bummed out, and that can be confused with depression. What's wrong? I'm depressed. I couldn't get that new guitar that I wanted. That's not depression. That's just being bummed out. Depression is something very different, and you'll know it if you're experiencing it, because it's the feeling of helplessness, hopelessness, dread, unbelievable guilt, and etc., etc. It's a dark night of the soul. That's different from being bummed out. So, there I go, digressing again. But I will say, when I was going through that period, 20, 21, 22, there were these very elusive short moments that I can only describe as euphoria. And I think they were moments that came when the suffering was so great psychologically that I was like creating, I was surrendering. There were little moments of surrender, and this intense feeling of euphoria would just come, and then it would go. But that wasn't happiness and depression. That was, I think, just maybe it was a defensive act of my soul. I don't know. The happiness that was mistranslated in my interview came when I realized the great value, the incredible value that depression brought to my life when I was able to overcome it. And that's the great value in any situation in your life that you may have judged as being bad or wrong. So before I had gone through that terrible depression, it always lurked in the background through my whole life. Just kind of wasn't, I was a happy kid, but it was kind of there. And then finally there was, through the evolution of stress, because that's what stress evolves with you. Stress is the evolution of negative thinking. It's when a conditioned thought comes into your life and you believe it, it can create stress in you, and then there's a new normal for you, and it has this little vibration of stress, and it's in the background. And then as you go through life, your perspective, if it's a negative egoic perspective and it's got fear in it, that stress builds. And then once that stress reaches a particular level, it becomes your new norm, your new normal. And you can see this. Some people function in the world with great levels of hidden stress in themselves. But you can see it if you can be present enough in their actions, in their words, in that's it, their actions, their aura, their vibe. You can see when somebody's strung out, and you can see when somebody's trying to be happy, but inside they're miserable, they're unhappy. And this becomes a new norm, but that background stress grows and grows until finally it pops, and your normal state of being is one of great depression, one of anxiety. And this is what depression is. It's the evolution of stress. And once you're in it, you don't know why. You have no idea what's going on. You don't have the tools to get out of it yet. You didn't have them beforehand. And this is the beauty in all of the experiences you have in life. They give you the tools for the evolution of the quality of your own life. So before I had gone through all of that, I didn't have the tools to see the elusive nature of it. I could not see that it was all a farce. It was all just mental noise that I've collected through the years that I inherited, and my ego creating this false sense of identity that was causing me suffering. But without that suffering, I would have never have come to know, I'll say, have glimpses of the truth of who I am and the truth of who you are. It required me to go through that. So as such, I see the great value, the incredible, incalculable value of that depression. Can you see in your life the value of those challenging moments? Maybe you can. One way to see it is to look at your past and recognize that certain events that took place that at the time you were going through them seemed really challenging, and that they should not be. This should not be. This shouldn't be happening. I think it should be different, and and it's not, and I'm really unhappy. And then you come to find later that that event was necessary in leading you in a direction where you did find certain kinds of fulfillment. Now, you can't be listening to the ego, because your ego will never find that fulfillment, and your ego will say, no, that experience sucked because where it took me didn't make me rich and famous and loved and superior to everybody the way my ego wants me to be. So you miss it. You have to eliminate that to see the value in the challenges you've had in your life. The flower needed the challenge to blossom. The moth needs the challenge to break free. The cocoon, in our case, is the ego that we're breaking free, and it's hard. But you will. You have no choice. You will break free because the ego, like the cocoon, has a built-in self-destruct mechanism, and it's called intense suffering. And it has to crumble. And when it does, then you realize the value in the challenge of it. So that's what I was referring to when I said happy. I don't even know if I use that word happy with depression. I am grateful for it, because without it, I'd still be one unhappy, miserable son of a bitch. And it's an ongoing process. I still have that. There's an incredible moment to talk about myself for a minute. I can see in myself this incredible momentum of egoic thinking, this incredible belief in conditioned thoughts. It's dissolving. It dissolves more and more every day. And doing these sessions with you is one of the ways that I'm learning to dissolve it, because you learn what you teach, and you teach what you learn. You're always learning and you're always teaching. And that's why I choose to teach these things, because in another way, it releases me. It's releasing me. And in such, it's releasing you, if you're ready for it, if you can hear it. And otherwise, it's you can tune in Tuesdays for Alien Guitar Secrets, where I can show you everything you want to know about the guitar. All right, so that's what I meant. Steve, how do you manage anger? I perceive you as a very peaceful person. However, you might be angry at times. I don't get angry. No, of course. But I actually have noticed over the past 4 or 5 years, and yeah, you could talk to people I've worked with. I get angry. I used to get really angry, really dark. Remember Jack Butler? Yeah, he was real. And I know some of you prefer him over Steve Vai, but sorry, I kicked his ass. I would say these days I can experience frustration and impatience. That I'm still very much associated with psychological time, but I'm working on it. And what that means is that's what impatience is. It's the addiction and the belief in time, in psychological time. More on that maybe at another time. But yeah, no, but the thing is, I recognize it. Because I've become more and more, and this is something that we discuss and I bring up quite often. More and more, you want to be aware of how you feel. That's why the episode on how do I feel right now is so important, because that's telling you what you're thinking and how you're feeling. Like if I feel frustrated, that didn't happen for no reason at all. It happened because of my egoic perspective of something. And frustration, even impatience, that's a form of suffering. And I've discovered the more that I've asked myself, how do I feel? The more in touch you are with the way you feel. And in the beginning, you may find yourself saying, I don't feel good right now. There's something that's not right. Okay, well, what am I thinking? And that's the unraveling of anything that doesn't feel right in front of you. And but it always requires you to recognize the thinking pattern. So when I feel frustration, I'm becoming more and more accustomed to feeling really good most of the time, to the point where even when something challenging or bad news happens, there's room for sadness. But sadness is different. It's that bittersweet isn't the right terminology. I don't know what the right way to put it is, but the sadness still comes. But it doesn't have a heaviness to it. It doesn't have a dread in it. It doesn't have a helplessness in it. It has an understanding that, yes, this is the world and these things happen. There can still be sadness, but the happiness is so big that there's a place for it. It doesn't rule your world. And when you start to recognize that, you don't want to feel bad. And when your main focus is how do I feel, then it becomes easier to make the choice to feel good, because you realize I don't want to feel bad. It has to become a simple choice. It has to become a simple preference. If I do that, I know I'm going to feel bad, but I like doing that because, well, you can still do that. You just got to change the way you're thinking about it. And that in and of itself is the releasing of the mental perspective of something that you might be doing that you have been led to believe is so bad, but really isn't. If you do anything consciously in a mindful present state, it cannot be bad. It cannot hurt you or anybody else. So that I do see anger sometimes, more, but I recognize it more and more in myself. And the hard thing is sometimes it feels good to be angry. The ego loves your anger. Oh, it loves that. That's a really good one because in it, it gets to show its sense of false superiority. How dare you? How dare you do that to me? Cut me off on the freeway or whatever, you know? Uh, so when you show your anger, it's like you're showing your superiority, but it's insane. It's a form of insanity because the foundation of anger is fear, not to the ego. The ego believes that anger is its strength. But your only true strength comes in non-defensiveness. That's another story because we're running late and I don't want to keep it too long. So maybe that's a future. Okay, what else? A couple more. Uh-oh. How do you consider yourself into the political spectrum? I knew that question was going to come. I'll do my best to answer it. It may not be a very satisfying answer for some of you. And then I'll go. Okay. I'm not a very political person. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican or even a independent. I consider myself an observer. And so I'm kind of like Switzerland, you know, right in the middle. But I do feel I have a responsibility as a citizen of this amazing country. I love, love, love America. I love all countries, actually. There's aspects of every country that I adore. But am very satisfied and happy being an American. I love America. And I love Americans. But I love everybody. But when it comes to politics, politics for me has always represented a form of human consciousness that represents insanity. But as a citizen, I want to do my best. So I try to be responsible. So what I do, I get the little pamphlets and I read the pros and the cons of the various things that are being presented that I need to vote on. And I vote with putting my best foot forward. Doesn't matter if it's a Democratic perspective or a Republican perspective. I don't look at any of that. I just feel, what makes the most sense here? And then I vote. And I do that with candidates. I do it with presidential elections where I do a little research. I try to get a feeling on the candidate, and then I make my own personal decision and I never discuss it. But I will say this. I always felt it was important that we support our president, whoever he or she may be at any given time. I think that's very important because now that doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with everything they say. Of course not. Matter of fact, it doesn't even mean you have to necessarily like them, you know. But they need support, and because when you support, you're supporting the country. You're coming together. So how do you do that when a particular administration is doing things that you don't believe in? Well, this is what I'm confronted. This is how I act when I'm confronted with a situation like that. Well, I know that there are things within any administration that they're doing that I can probably find that I can support. And with the current administration, the Trump administration, I remember I said, okay, well, what are they doing that I can probably feel some support? And I started looking, I was like, whoa, okay. There's maybe doing a lot of things that I don't necessarily support, but that's fine. I will do my best to vote on them, and that's just my way. Some people feel a lot more emotional about getting involved, and that's fine. It's when you can do it on a conscious level, your actions for change will be much more effective than when you fight something. Because anything you fight, you create more of. Now I know that I'm going to get a lot of messages about that, but that's just the way I see it. And so when I was looking at the current administration, I started to see things that I could very easily get behind. Now, in order to do this, though, you have to create an opening from your crazy egoic perspectives of, the further left or right you go, the more insane you become. Okay, the more personal you take things, and the more radical. And you can see this. Just turn on the news. You can read the papers. You can see it when you have a conversation with a friend and you go into politics. It only gets uncomfortable the further you go. So I try to stay right in the middle. And I'll go like this. Boop, boop, boop. Okay, that makes sense. Nope. But as I was saying, some people feel they really want to do something about it. And you can, but if you can't, shut up and sit down. Yes. Shut up in your mind, because you're only bringing suffering to yourself by complaining about things that you can't change. So what I did with the current administration, as I was saying, I started looking at some of the things that they were achieving, and I went, wow, jobs are incredibly high. So many businesses have come back. There's a lot of money being brought back into the American environment. There's trade deals that are finally being put into place that are fair, that are bringing us billions and billions and billions. How can I not support something like that? I think that's good. It's fair, at least from what I've learned in my perspective. And another thing is, obviously, it's difficult to get sober information from anywhere. So you got to be very ginger with that, and use your instincts. Use your not your feelings, your instincts. How do you what do you feel? When I say not your feelings, I mean not the hate-generated feelings that you have based on unnecessary thought. You got to clear all that out and see, how does this make me feel? What's my instincts telling me? And that you're asking yourself a question. And in the episode on religion, when I was translating into Christian terminology, you for that's your Holy Spirit. You can call that your Holy Spirit, or that's your direct relationship with Jesus. You can see it like that if you want. Or you can just say it's feeling. So I aligned myself with these things that I saw that were happening within this administration that resonated with me. And that brought me a sense of peace. I don't have political dynamos within me. I don't mind what anybody else thinks or feels. They have that prerogative, and there's a place for it. But I do feel good supporting our country by supporting the current president in those ways, in the ways that resonate with me. And the things that don't, I do my best to take effective action within the capacity that I can or care to. So that's my answer of my political spectrum. But I hardly ever talk about it. I don't partake in political functions. Not that I think there's anything wrong with it, not at all. It's just where that's just my comfort zone. As a matter of fact, we got a call from the White House when Trump was being inaugurated, and they asked me if I wanted to play the Star Spangled Banner. And I politely declined, not for any reason except I'm just not that artist. It doesn't matter who was running or being inaugurated or whatever. I'm just not comfortable being a political spokesperson. What you just saw me say is about the extent of any kind of political direction that I would suggest. And the only reason I suggest it is because I know it will bring you more peace. Because if you look right now, some of you, not all of you, some of you have very intense emotional reactions to the political forum that's taking place in the world, not just in our country, but in the world. When you're running around from room to room and arguing and fighting with your spouse even over a political, I mean, you saw it happen when in the current administration, when Trump was elected, it was divisive even within families, you know. But if each one in those families was to be able to say, well, wait a minute. Okay, this is the way it is. This person was elected for better or for worse, as far as I'm concerned. Many people, the majority of people, thought it was the right thing and the good thing. And the jury is out on that, because I don't see how you can ever really understand the effect that a president has for 20 to 40 years later, you know, because you're just tied up in the hype of the fearful television and stuff like that. It's hard to make your own decision. But if you feel yourself being swayed intensely by politics to the point where you're having arguments, it's fine, but there is another way, if you wanted. But again, you'd have to first want it. There's that catch. You'd have to want peace. And most people don't. Not yet. Not until the suffering becomes too heavy. But if you feel like you're ready, one way to approach it is to want it, see your thoughts about it. Holy mackerel, I am being really reactive whenever the word Trump comes up. That is actually causing an intense form of suffering inside myself, which is affecting, I'm attacking myself when I allow myself, because nobody else is really doing it. Trump has nothing to do with it. He really doesn't. It's me that has something to do with it. Not something to do with it, everything to do with it. So I see that I am at the cause of my intense suffering here, and it's affecting the quality of my life. It's affecting my health. It's affecting my relationships. And now I want to do something about it. What can I do about it? Because, boy, politics have got me really tied up. I am in a knot. And I can't let go of my hatred. Okay, well, can you see the thoughts that are creating the hatred? That's the first step in separating yourself. Well, the first step is wanting to, and then seeing them. So then so if you can see these political dynamo thoughts that you're having, and maybe you're not destined to find peace in this forum. Maybe your destiny is to go out and fight. Could be. That's part of the evolution. It's destructive. It's chaotic. It's the cause of the suffering in the world, but it just might be part of your function. I don't know. But you will eventually break out of it. And one of the ways to do it is what I'm explaining right now. Recognizing your political dynamic within yourself and wanting to change it. So then you say, okay, well, is there anything that this current administration, and the current administration could be the one in 10 years from now for you, 20 years, or the one, not in the past, too late for that. What is this current administration doing that might be good, that I could align with, that I could say, well, yeah, I can support that. I can support that. Now, some people will never find that because they are so rigid in their unconsciousness, they refuse to see anything else but their own perspective of disarray. Okay, that's fine. But if you're ready, you will find something in an administration, in this current administration, that you can get behind. And that is, I would suggest that is your obligation as a citizen of this country. We need it. We need your support. We need you to support. We need everybody. This is going to bring us together, finding the commonality in the differences. And then you can do something about those other things that you would like to change. So I think that might be helpful for you to experiment with. I know it works for me, because politics are not a hotbed. I don't mind. Okay, so that's over 2 hours. Wow. Okay. Well, again, thank you guys. That will be going to wrap up Under It All, episode 6. I think we're going to call it Evolution, since that was what I was focusing on in the beginning. So I think I'm going to be doing I believe I'll be doing a Alien Guitar Secrets on Tuesday at noon. I have to start working on my record pretty soon. And these things do take time. I love doing them. And your response to these episodes is very encouraging. And I also wanted to mention one other thing, something that just came across our desk like yesterday, is something new that Facebook is doing that you can take part in. They are allowing monetization of streaming, live streaming. I don't know a lot about it. Stephen Bradley, my media guy, was telling me about it. And this is something that, okay, he's typing me something right now. He said, click the star next to the comment box. I guess that's it. And you can buy, okay, you can buy these stars, and it's a donation. You don't have to, obviously. I'm not asking you to make a donation to this live stream, but you can now. That's cool. If you want. And I think it's like you buy a star. You click the star next to the comment box, and you can buy stars. And I think you can donate a penny. Is that right, Steve? A penny or something like that? Or you can donate multiple amounts, as much as you want. You can donate as much as you want, and which is nice for people who are doing these live Facebooks that are really suffering economically because of the shutdown. You can support them by checking out their live Facebook streams and making donations. I'm very fortunate and happy to report that I'm doing really well. And if you want to make a donation, I would make that. I would donate it to my Make a Noise Foundation. So it's a charitable donation. And Make a Noise, I've had it for many years, decades. I started with it with Ruta Sapetis, my dear Ruta, who managed me for 21 years. She was really instrumental in building it. And through the years, we've given out hundreds of thousands of dollars to all sorts of causes, everything from music scholarships to various charities, the Extraordinary Families, Missing and Exploited Children. It's one of my favorite thing to do is to donate money from Make a Noise Foundation. I can only donate to another charity, though. So if you make a donation there, that you're welcome to. But it's brand new, so I'm not exactly sure how it works. Say, Steve, can you close out of this this window here, because I want to get to the main one. All right. In any event, I'm going to say bye, and I'm going to say I'll see you Tuesday, and I'll see you around. And thank you again for all your support. Hope you enjoyed this little episode. And I see you. And I appreciate you. Thank you.